start recording, first of all, and then pull up my introduction. So, hello everyone, and welcome to the third of a 5-part series, Let's Talk About It, Women's Suffrage. Thank you for taking the time to join us this evening. I'm Heather Register Zabindin, the Outreach Coordinator for the Bobby L. Roberts Library of Arkansas History and Art at the Central Arkansas Library System. After the program is over, a brief survey will appear in your browser window. Please take a minute to complete this survey for us. We need to report our findings back to our grant funders. Tonight, we will be discussing Vanguard, how Black women broke barriers, won the vote, and insisted on equality for all. I'd like to thank the American Library Association and the National Endowment for Humanities for their support of this project. Over the course of this 5-part series, we will be joined by women's history scholars. Tonight, we're joined by project scholar Courtney Bradford of Mosaic Templars Cultural Center. Courtney is from Little Rock. She holds an MA in Public History from UA Little Rock and a BA in Anthropology, African and African American Studies from the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville. She's been the curator of Mosaic Templars Cultural Center for a year. Before that, she worked as a full-time history instructor at the University of Arkansas Pulaski Technical College, where she is now an adjunct instructor of African American Studies. She also serves on the board of the Arkansas Women's History Institute. In this evening's session, we will start off with a short presentation from Courtney before starting the book discussion. If at any time during the program you experience technical issues, please feel free to message me in the chat and I'll do my best to help you troubleshoot. With that being said, I'm pleased to turn things over to Courtney.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Heather. First and foremost, I am so happy to be presenting this book to you all and presenting the discussions that we will talk about this evening. I also like to say I do have a 7-year-old son who you might hear screaming in the background. So if you hear that, just don't mind him. Let's focus on what we have at hand. But like Heather said, today, the book that we will be discussing is Vanguard, how Black women broke barriers, won the vote, and insisted on equality for all. My presentation this evening was going to be a lovely PowerPoint, but I'm going to wing it and hopefully it'll be all right. It's gonna be all right. But one fascinating thing I like to start off with is, of course, the book is historical, but I would also like to bring it up into our context today. So of course, when we think about Black women in politics today, we think about Kamala Harris, Keisha Bottoms, the mayor of Atlanta, even Stacey Abrams, who ran for the governor of Georgia, and hopefully once again she'll run again, and hopefully she'll win. These are 3 women in politics that we can name today that have gone and pushed beyond not only the Black Lives Matter movements, but just representing Black women in politics. But it's hard to talk about these 3 women and not talk about the women who came before them, who fought so hard 200 years ago to bring us these rights, that we're even able to vote, not only vote, but to run for office, to be the vice president of the United States of America. How amazing is that? Definitely our ancestors' wildest dreams to have someone in her position. And so the story itself, which I love because the author herself sprinkles in a bit of personal stories, and she speaks about heroes, unsung heroes that are in her family by the names of Nancy Bell Graves, Susan, and Fanny. And so these 3 women during their time, of course, her great-great-grandmother was born enslaved in 1840, and her great-grandmother and her grandmother all pushed for African-American women's political rights in churches, women's clubs, and Black organizations, as well as institutions of higher learning. And so she illustrates her family history so beautifully, and speaks to their efforts that they were made to secure political power that went, well beyond the ballot box. when we think about these women, we also have to think about their white counterparts, the white women. They also built liberation movements, but mostly away from the male sphere. We see that in this book that Black women are not only fighting for their rights, but they're doing it right in the midst of their communities along with men. And that was something to be, I hate to say, but feared. It was feared because they came with their own mind. They kind of fought for what they believed in and really did not put themselves in the box that they were constantly put in. They kept pushing for more and more. And that is just so, so impressive. As they're, faced with the opposition, not only from the racist whites, but also from Black and white men who thought that the women did not have a place within the movement. And so with that, Black women continue to push to expand their roles. They are establishing organizations such as the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs, which is incorporated in 1905. They established this because in the push for the suffragette movement, Black women were left kind of to themselves. They couldn't go into a white suffragette organization and fight. They had to form those organizations with themselves. We also see African-American sororities such as Delta Sigma Theta that played a huge role in the push for the 19th Amendment, which was established in 1920. And it was so very important, not only for white women to have the right to vote, but also Black women who continue to remain disenfranchised by the racist violence and other statutes. And so with that, it's one question I'm going to go back and forth. So this is one question that I would love to know the answer to. Have you all within your own families know of unsung heroes like the Nancy Bell Graves, like Susan, like Fanny, that made contributions to social change on either side, and in turn, have they inspired you to be an agent of change as well?
Feel free to unmute yourselves and.
Oh yes, definitely.
Yes.
I don't have anybody on that scale. I mean, what's so amazing, and I don't know if it's, growing up being told so many of these stories about the times. And of course, before TV and the radio, there was a lot more sharing, generation to generation. But I do remember when I was in high school, and it concerns a difference between how a Chinese boy was treated and how I was treated. We both had the same grade point average, and I was asked into the Honor Society, and he wasn't. My grandmother, who did not work outside the home, who did not have her own social security number. She was granddad's number A, picked up the phone, called the principal, and explained that this simply would not do. And typically, it's the same thing we hear about Asians now, that if we let the Asians in, they'll get all the honors. And if they get all the honors, then we're that inability to share. So yes, Philip got in the Honor Society, and that was one of the proudest moments of my life. And I was just so surprised. So just without a thought. But small.
No, but even the smallest things that they create that push, that and you've never, I would say, you never know what impact that had on him. That small phone call that your grandmother made. So yeah, she's an unsung hero. Definitely. I guess, and even in that part, I guess the same. My grandparents taught during segregation. And one thing that my grandmother always taught me growing up is that, she never made a difference between, students. Even after, desegregation, and she had students who were white, she said, I never made a difference between them because we're all human. And I taught them all the same. And so that's something that she instilled in me and instilled in my siblings as well. So those little small changes. So it's just very much so the same. Very much so the same.
And I think that sometimes people didn't, unless you were there to witness those acts, they tended, I know my grandmother, if she did do anything like that, she would have never said anything about it. She would have just done it kind of quietly. We think of activists as marching or protesting, really loud acts. And I mean loud in a good way, but very vocal acts, where it's all those little small acts that people do that can really affect change without them realizing it. And so, yeah, so I kind of wonder if people have these individuals in their families, but they've never thought to ask. They've never investigated it further. I mean, it kind of be a neat project to get people to, investigate it further.
Right. And that's what I was thinking too, because as we think about it, because these are like our hidden histories. We talk about, Emancipation Proclamation or the 13th, the 14th, the 15th Amendment, but how did they get to this point? It didn't just fall out the sky. There are people who are pushing for it. And oftentimes we think abolitionism, and sometimes because the histories are omitted a lot with African Americans, we don't realize that they were also pushing and they were also fighting. Even though they were free, they were still fighting. And so that brings me to a section within the book that I thought was really interesting. And so it speaks, so this section here talks about, what free African Americans were experiencing and how, how they thought of slavery, what they thought of abolitionism, and then what their fight was as well. And so this is on page 45, if y'all have the text. So abolitionism was a dangerous business from the very start. Crowds turned into mobs and opponents into assassins. Early martyrs included Presbyterian minister and journalist Elijah Lovejoy, who was killed in Illinois in a melee that also destroyed his press and abolitionist materials. Few anti-slavery lecturers could avoid the swarm of an angry crowd or hearing words of a heckler. Violence occurred as a regular part of the movement, requiring that activists take care of how they traveled and with whom. State authorities also meted out punishments. Abolitionists could expect to face charges of sedition for the mere possession of anti-slavery materials, especially in southern states. Lending direct aid to a fugitive slave promised criminal prosecution. Risk ran in many directions. Free African Americans living in northern states endorsed the radical abolitionist critique of slavery. They saw their own interest in the anti-slavery cause, but it was not a crude or distant self-interest. Though they generally lived beyond slavery's reach, the threat of kidnapping was ever present, and the discrimination they faced was rooted in the enduring association of Blackness with enslavement. They reasoned that free Black people will be barred from full equality as long as slavery persisted. Many in the free states had once been held as property. Their liberty was new and fragile. Many others had loved ones who remained against their will in slave-holding states. To oppose slavery, to fight for its downfall, was to protect one's freedom and work for the liberty of family and friends. And so with that, my next question lies. My son. What were some of the alternative routes the African Americans, at this point, free African Americans had to face and to take in order to fight for the freedom, not only of themselves, even though they were free, they knew that they were not free because everyone was not free. And so they had to, of course, we know they had to avoid being kidnapped, thrown into slavery, whether they were ever enslaved or not. So we know that with the story of Solomon Northrop, that yes, people would be kidnapped and thrown into slavery who had never been enslaved. Never been enslaved. I would also go on to read, free Black women wrestled with where they fit in the new anti-slavery politics. Enslaved people's experiences resonated with their own plight. They suffered anti-Black discrimination and had family and friends who remained in bondage. They clashed with men, Black and white, in their efforts to champion the anti-slavery cause. They also strained against narrow prescription of their public roles, but their circumstances were distinct. Black women generally did not experience the troubles related to property holding and inheritance that concerned white women of the property middle class. And the growing political circles built by white women often did not welcome them. When they organized, Black women increasingly created their own associations, spaces from which they began to tell their own stories of what it meant to call for women's rights. Have you ever felt as if, you were refusing to claim your place at the forefront because you lacked your credentials or education or anything that you felt qualified you to go to the front? Have you ever felt that way? And I ask that because we have these women who, they're mothers, they're daughters. I'm not going to say at no point did they think they were not qualified, but when we think about that now, we say, how is that a politician? How's that a politician? Then we think about Sojourner Truth. Mm-hmm. We know Sojourner Truth was born a slave, and without any formal training of any kind, she proved herself to be a very incredibly impactful speaker. Even when she spoke on stages with orators who are of a greater education and greater experience than her, she was able to make an impact by saying, well, ain't I a woman? Am I not a woman? Of course, I'm a slave, but am I not a woman too? Can I not be both? What is the thing with being Black and being a woman? Can I not be both? Being enslaved and a woman. So it's having those two parts and having to fight for those. But have you ever experienced that? Is one question. And then, do you think men or women are more likely to underestimate their own self-worth?
I definitely think that a lot of women are going to question their self-worth. And I think that there's a lot of times where people, I can't think of any instance specifically to me. But I think that a lot of times maybe we're scared to come to the forefront for a variety of reasons, whether do you really want to get that involved? Do you really understand the talking points enough to be able to respond to somebody who's aggressively coming at you with other talking points, that if you listen to, they kind of make sense, but not really. And so I think that there's an element of fear, and the fact that we just have so much to do a lot of times, women, right? We're not just, nowadays we're working and we're raising kids and we're doing all the other things. We have our day job and we have our night job, and many women work more than one day job and then do their night job.
Right. And so I think about Joanna Lee. She's mentioned in the book as a woman preacher. And of course, during her time, women were not allowed to preach. That was a no-no. And even now in some denominations, some religions, women still can't do that. But back then, she had an idea in her head that it didn't matter. It didn't matter what the status quo was. She had a word from God and she wanted to spread that. And she felt that she was qualified enough. Even though they told her that she was not qualified, she still found it within herself to go out, not only go out and preach, but then go to the church and say, hey, I want to preach the word. And this is in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And that is such an amazing thing that she would even have the audacity, not just to even do something like that in her time. And so she, like I said, fought the status quo and said, "Hi, hey, I'm gonna still do it. I'm gonna still accomplish that, in spite of these men not wanting me in the church." And what's the thing with men not wanting women in the church?
What's the thing with men not wanting women anywhere? I mean,
right, right. What is it?
I mean, what are we that intimidating?
I want to say yes.
Comfort.
Yes.
Don't you think comfort is and not just comfort, but the idea of having a place with boundaries, and the whole that really old notion of women's place in the home and in the men's place, and how unfair that was to everybody. I mean, I got really interested in Jane Crow, and I started reading about just the whole argument about the idea that this is a real classification: male, female, white, black. That those aren't social constructs. There's something really, and they got boundaries, and you're either in this box or this box, and people aren't like that. I mean, we know as moms, just because you have 2 girl children does not mean you have 2 entities that are in any, that match, or that. And so I think part of it's comfort. I think a lot of it is sheer power. I think having staff, because typically if we do have a position we're the staff, we're the cleanup crew, we're the cooks, we're the tidiers, we're the fetchers.
Yes.
It's and that would be nice, I suppose. So there's that whole tradition thing, but I think what really struck me about the women preachers was first their self-motivation and their confidence that when you're sure that God has spoken, that takes a lot of fear out of.
Yes.
It gives you a certain and then there's just the evidence before people's eyes. I think she must have been an incredible preacher. And this is kind of like one of the nonviolent conflict strategies. If you interact with people and you learn through your own eyes, oh my gosh, not only is that a human being, it's a valuable person, and then you don't see them as some inferior alien. You see something different. So just that process of acting out, yes, I can. Watch me.
Yes, exactly. Because I often wonder why, and I think you're right. Women are very much so intimidated. Not women, sorry, men are very much so intimidated by women.
Yeah.
Because when we go, we go. Like, no matter whatever it's for, we're gonna keep going for it. And we have the heart and the passion and the emotion to keep going. And I think that's like naturally within us.
And when it's survival and your family,
yes.
Don't make a mom angry.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think the family is the big thing. And so I will say, I can't imagine, but I was like, well, no. When you're thinking about your family, you have to keep fighting for their freedom. If you're already free, you're fighting for continued freedom. And if your family is not free, you're fighting for that. It's like a constant fight. It's a push, it's an emotion, and they kept going. And I wish I had some of that. I guess I was like, I wish I had a lot of that, because they were really fighting. And so that's another reason why I don't know if y'all heard me saying I'm not my ancestors, or something strange like that. And I hate when people say that, because it's like, what do you mean? It was like, our ancestors, they were fighting, like they were doing things that I can't even imagine, and what they were able to accomplish. So of course you have them pushing for, the Emancipation Proclamation. You have the Civil Rights Act of 1866, like the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, Brown versus Board of Education, the Civil Rights Act, all these things that they kept pushing for. And women, were right there. So even after the 19th Amendment, before the 19th Amendment, they kept pushing and they couldn't even vote. And so even after that, you just kept pushing and pushing and pushing because it mattered. Because these are their children and they're fighting for us who, are their children. In a way, we are their children. And they continued fighting. And that's something that I think is amazing that gets kind of overshadowed when we think about these things. Go ahead. So with that, go ahead, Heather.
Well, I've always just been so in awe of Black women, the strength of Black women, the power of Black women, that yeah, we have some strong white women too, but there is a power in a Black woman that doesn't exist for us. And I just have always thought it was incredible the way that Black women went about their right to vote movement as opposed to the way white women went. And I know that a lot of it had to do with racism, that, if a bunch of Black women had gone in front of the White House to picket, there would have been a very, very different outcome. Yep. Jail would have been not an option, but I've just always thought it was very interesting how culturally we tend to stay in our lanes. We tend to stay in our lanes, and this is how white society does things, and this is how Black society does things. And that was what was kind of fascinating for me.
Yeah. And so then I guess if we can bring it closer to the forefront, do we continue to see that? Like even now when we think about the movements that are going on, so we see, the Pride movement, of course, the news of Roe v. Wade being struck down, but are we still moving in the same way? And that's something I often kind of try to look at and see, like, are Black women moving differently than white women? And if so, what does that look like? But then I think now, especially after Friday, I would like to think it's more of, hey, we're women. Like, we're women. We know that in this case that minorities are going to be the most affected during this, but it's still a push for womanhood. And so that's one thing that I want to see when it comes to politics, especially in this situation, is pushing for just women, like women, regardless of socioeconomic background, ethnicity, that we're women banding together and fighting for what we believe is, right.
I do think we're probably more of an integrated movement than we were before. I mean, I think the Women's Project, which used to be over on Main Street, I remember the house, I can see the house, but the Women's Project really started to be a much more integrated organization. And then when you see photos of the Women's March from 5 years ago, 6 years.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. You see all walks of life, all colors in that movement, in that march, that you hadn't necessarily seen before.
Yeah.
And that was very hopeful.
Yes. So with that, we're talking about women and race. Intersectionality is a metaphor for understanding how multiple forms of inequality can compound themselves in the life of a single individual. It fosters an awareness of the fact that people are often disadvantaged by multiple sources. So, as I mentioned before, being Black and being a woman, or being Black and being gay. It fosters awareness in the fact, that people are often disadvantaged by multiple sources of oppression. We said class, we said race, gender, and gender identity as well. In the book, Jones observes that some of the trailblazing Black women included in the book lived the theory of intersectionality long before we came to explain Black women's lives by that term. And so what does intersectionality mean to you? And did Vanguard change your views on intersectionality? If so, how? I would say I'm Black and a woman. Woo. It is. I would say even before Vanguard, for me, I had a battle, but it was, I guess, more of a personal battle between which one. And lately, because of not just, but even before Friday, I would fight between the two, whether, which one do I go harder for, being a woman or being Black? And I was like, but I'm kind of like, I'm both. Like, how do you do one? And I actually had that identity issue, like, which one do I go hard for? But I'm going hard for both, but I'm doing it at the same time, and it's kind of weird. It's kind of weird for me to be both. It's like a duality, but I guess, that's who I am. I'm Black and I'm a woman. The book itself, empowered. I felt more empowered and inspired, even though I knew stories of some of these women. And of course, I can name so many women like Ida B. Wells, Anna Julia Cooper, Mary Church Terrell. I can name all these women, but I loved how the author put family in perspective, and just how, like I said, the small little things build to something. And even thinking about these women were going in, and I'm so proud. I'm just proud, very proud that they could do both. That even then they could do both. They could be Black, they could be women, and they could fight for both of them at the same time. And look what they were able to accomplish, and they accomplished so much. And so it's being proud, and then realizing now that, these are our ancestors, we can push forward in our fight for womanhood, for Blackness, for whatever crosses me, a mother, because I'm a mother. I'm a mother. I am in a certain class. I'm in all these different things, but I can be all these things and fight for all these things and still get them all. And that was something that it resonates with me so much. This story makes me really empowered to keep pushing. To very much so keep pushing.
I like that you're talking about power, because I think that's what seems to be at work. It's as if a person, maybe it's polyamory, or it doesn't, they realize something, whether it's, I should speak in church, or I'm a boy, man, I'm going to dress as a boy, and I'm going to have a future, and somehow their own sense of themselves, other people start saying, well, all right, and you can dress that way, and then they get strong, they get support, they get stronger, and then they realize, I'm limited here, I've got to go someplace else.
Yes.
And then they have the courage to go, like, to New York or law school, whatever. But they have a sense that I've done as much as I can do here, and I'm just going to be stuck if I don't. And to leave home, and to leave the familiar, and open oneself up to who knows what kind of risk and what kind of challenges without your support structure. But realizing that you can accumulate your own power, whether it's the voice power, the speech power, or the logistics power, or the networking, whatever it is, and then prove to people, and then all of a sudden you've got followers, you got allies, you're on the way. But just so many, I am so thankful for this book. I have met so many interesting people I never would have come across. And, to hear the background of Rosa Parks, I mean, how could we know so little about a person who had done so much?
Exactly. And then why? And why? Why did we know she was more than just a seamstress sitting down a butt?
But and the way the scholars treat her.
I think that's it. I think that I am so glad to have this book, because I think, and I hope that more white women will read this book, because there has been so little written about Black women and Black women in this movement.
Mm-hmm.
You were talking about your son, Courtney. My cat has decided to make his presence known. So if you hear him, I apologize. I mean, the husband and the child left the building. They've gone on to do something else. The cat has decided, well, I'm going to make mine. But I think this book is so important. And I think that for too long, the white narrative has shaped all of American history. And I didn't even know that I was being shaped by it, and it was shaping what I was doing. If that makes sense.
No, yes.
And people like Rosa Parks. I mean, we all know who she is.
Mm-hmm. Hey.
He's like, I'm going to be right in the middle of all of this.
Right. What's that?
So, I mean, yeah, I think if you asked anybody in America, no matter who they are, who Rosa Parks is, they can say, well, she's the woman that sat on the bus, or she was the seamstress. I mean, there's like the bullet points, right? The talking points that you know about her. But there's so much more about her that people don't know and that they need to know.
Right.
I think that's true of so many people in all the movements.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you said that about being hidden, because then imagine what these stories can do for the people, men, women, children who are, a part of these marginalized or oppressed groups, and how that can inspire them. And, we talk about power, but there's so much power in identity. So knowing stories about more than Rosa Parks, but more than she sat down on the bus, but going deeper into her history, into who she was. And the same thing for, let's say, Ida B. Wells. And I love Ida B. Wells, by the way. I absolutely love her. Absolutely. What that can do for a child. And
next month, the book is actually a children's book that we're reading. And I would love to see these stories turned into children's books.
And that's
right?
What is this? Because
the series.
A lot of things that I buy for my child are they're African American stories, and they're inspiring, or they're motivating, and a lot has to do with historical figures, because I want him to know these figures, but I also want him to be inspired. And so you think about all these little stories that we've never heard of, and how they have really, if let's say, if a community would have heard of, it could almost save someone's life. Up until that point, it was like, if you just knew about so and so, things could be different. And then also think about how these stories would transform people who are living in a privileged society, and how that would impact them as well. So now they're seeing people who they may, let's say, mostly see negative media or negative representation of. Now you see these stories and hear these stories and see these things that you never knew. And now it's like, what? Who is this? Like, wow, there's people like that. So it's on both sides. Like, it's sad the stories were hidden, but what it could do for the world on every side.
Well, and I think something you just said is really important. I think that unfortunately, in a way, until people are personally affected by certain things, they can have anger and hate towards it. I'm watching a show on Hulu right now called Mormon No More. And it's really good.
I was gonna say,
it's really good. It's about two women raised in the Mormon church. One, like, her family are pioneers, they can do their genealogy back to the beginning of Mormonism.
To the beginning.
And another woman had converted from Catholicism to Mormonism, and they both had children. They were very happy in their marriages to men, and they met each other at a Mormon ward meeting, and they said it was just like fire sparks. There was no denying it. And one of the women's mothers said, you know, I didn't believe that LGBTQ was a thing, a real thing. She believed what the church had told her. She said, until I see my daughter so happy. So yeah, until you have that personal moment, a lot of times you're just not gonna get it. And that's sad. We should believe that people, are telling us the truth and telling us the real thing.
Yeah.
So maybe more people will read this book and go, oh yeah, that really
like,
is the way.
Like that. Oh, it went down like that. And this is how we need to move forward, especially when thinking about the idea of freedom and what freedom means to us. And then thinking about the benefit of having society with diverse lawmakers, as far as of course the demographics are concerned, and how we can learn from our past and to kind of push forward as far as the policies and things that we put in place for our children. I'm really excited.
One thing I'd like to know more about, because it's just not the time period I know anything about, but and you mentioned, like Black lawmakers and, end of Civil War, from slavery to, and I know there was a lot of contribution of free people as well as formerly enslaved people, but in what, 25 years, businesses, banks, lawyers, medicine, teachers, the creation of a middle class and an upper class and an upward mobility, and in so short a time,
quickly.
It just seems, and it couldn't have been that much capital available. I mean, it had to be a lot of initiative and entrepreneurship and cooperation and how did that happen?
And pulling
fast.
Pulling together, like you said, it's not as if there's a whole lot of capital out there, but then when you're not able to borrow normally from, let's say, a bank, now you're borrowing within a community. And so then it's and I have to go back to something my uncle said. My uncle, he owned an Esso gas station here in North Little Rock. This is back in the 50s. And so he talked about how, he didn't necessarily have the money. He didn't necessarily have the money to pay the franchise fee, because they had to pay a franchise fee to Exxon. And so they had a coalition of Black-owned businesses at that time. And so let's say if my uncle couldn't pay his franchise fee, he can go to the coalition and they will, cut him a check, and then he would pay them, them back for the loan. And he was able to, keep his gas stations going and put his children through college and things like that. So I would assume, or in my mind, that's how I think it would be the same way, that they're pulling together, knowing that all they have are themselves. And so now they're pulling their money together. And then you think about continuing to marry into these families, the free families of color. And you're right. Now we're establishing businesses. And now we're moving to different places to where, if there are places that are, I say, pocket communities, African American pocket communities. And so they're having to establish those things. They don't have the schools or the banks and things, but now they're having to establish them within their community and keep everything here. So that's where the wealth is going, because now the dollar just keeps turning and turning in this community to keep this community to grow so largely. And so then they're able to, sustain themselves in that manner.
And then to see it in not every place, but in so many places, taken away. All of it.
Yes.
Kill these people. Just
And I was recently viewing something and something like that happened in the scene, and the guy, he said, why? And the guy replied, he said there was a whole farm full of men, Black men, just like him. And the guy was, smart. He was well spoken. He was a former slave who was free. and they were wealthy. They had a wine producing community, and they were all armed with weapons and things of that nature. And so I could assume it's jealousy. Like you say, it's the question of, well, how could they sustain this? Is especially if you're taught from a very young age that African slaves or enslaved people are not intelligent. They're not able to do anything not for themselves. They can't think for themselves. You have to think for them. They are property. They're not even humans. So if you're coming about all these things and you're thinking, they are inferior to you. Hold on, baby. 1 second, baby. 1 second. That they're inferior to you. That, of course, in your mind, you're thinking, well, how are they able to accomplish so much? How are they able to, till this land and create a whole vineyard? How are they able to, like you say, sustain these banks and these schools in this community? And they created all these beautiful big houses. And it's something that we don't even have that over here. And so then I say it's jealousy, it's hatred, and it's ignorance, thinking that they could not. And the people who feel like they could not are the people who are still enslaved. You can control someone who cannot think for themselves, someone who does not know how to read, someone who doesn't know how to, I was a thing, but know how to. Now I'm lost for words, but what I'm saying, that you get to this point and you control them like that. You're thinking that everyone's like that, but to be free is also free in your mind. And so these people they dared to build their own and vowed to be in their own communities. And we know oftentimes it might be just one random situation that causes it to go to crap. And usually it's a lie. It starts off with a lie.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one excuse. It is almost like, okay, I just need one reason.
Yeah. Conspiracies.
Yes. I'm gonna go, I just need one reason to go on over there and just tear it on down. And so with that, and what we know about property, this generational wealth. So generations of people have lost their generational wealth because it was stolen, it was burned, it was destroyed, it was taken from them. And they're afraid, scared to death to even mention anything about it. I know that in my family history, my great grandfather in Georgia owned over 200 acres of land right after the Civil War. But after he passed away, the KKK scared the entire family off the property. Like, they scared them all the way to Arkansas, and they were in Georgia. So that's land that's taken, and generational wealth that's gone from a family simply because of racism and the idea of how dare they think that they can obtain something? How dare they think that they could have something to pass on to their families? And so then, like I said, a lot of the fight becomes the familiar family. It becomes the family fight. It becomes, like I say, it happens to you now. We're going to keep and continue to push and push and push. But a lot of the slowing down of the fights is it's the fear. It's the trauma. It's the constant trauma of being African American, being an African in America, or being an enslaved person in America. And those psychological bonds that come with that is something that it takes so much to be broken. Even today, that's something I teach in my class. My students, we talk about post-traumatic slave syndrome. And I talk about post-traumatic slave syndrome, of how even today we're still living with those remnants. And not only African Americans, but we say even white people, anyone here who is a descendant from that era, we are still living those things, and we're doing it in such a way that we don't even realize that that's what we're doing. And so I ask my students constantly, so how can we cure this? What's the cure? And it's the conversation. It's speaking and being honest. It's having the conversations about race, having conversations about trauma, and how those things impact our communities and how they have divided our communities as well. And if we're wanting things to be equitable, because I think it's kind of hard. I mean, I want equal, but I really want equity too. I was going to say, because equal sometimes doesn't work out. Can I get some equity? Can I get that? Can we get that? And so it's talking about those things, and it's pushing the African American community forward. I think in these past few years, I feel that the African American community has a bigger push. They feel like they are more likely to achieve those dreams that were once not attainable, whether it's through disenfranchisement because of voting, being denied business loans, being denied housing in certain areas, being denied, interest into schools, whatever it is. I feel that now there's a bigger empowering feeling within the African American community that we can do it. But it's definitely, I feel that it all has to be discussed. It can't be decisive. A lot of people are going back to historically Black colleges, which are amazing. It's amazing that they are. And I don't know if they're going back into silos. I think they might be going back into silos, but hopefully not everybody. But I feel like it needs to be discussed. And that's the only way we can really truly move forward, is discuss these elephants in the room. And race is a really big elephant in our country that needs to be discussed. And that's the only way to end the fighting and the things that we've been, arguing about for the past 200-300 years. We've been arguing about the same things, but it's the only way to end it is to actually have those true discussions and to realize that we are one race. We are the human race. This is what my grandmother taught me. This is what I've learned in anthropology as an anthropologist. This is what I teach my students in history, that we are one race. Like, we could fight all day, but we are one race. And when we realize this, we will be able to come together to fight, to push for more things such as womanhood, women's rights.
Well, as speak also to the Black churches, because it's so New Testament oriented. I mean, the concept is love. It's not smite, it's not okay. And God kill my enemy for me. It's the power of the New Testament, the gospel.
The involvement of the Black church is something that it's amazing. I can talk about it because I grew up in the Black church. I did my thesis on the Black church and African American religion, and it is phenomenal. It is absolutely phenomenal. But the I can say personally for myself, and then we can go back all the way to the 1700s when we see the first establishment of one of the first Black churches here in America. The Black church was a space that, African Americans can go into, and it was their sanctuary, like literally their sanctuary. They did not have to fight in the church. They could be there and be themselves and worship their God freely. Of course, we know during slavery, it was forced upon enslaved people. And even through that, enslaved Africans took it and made it their own. And so you hear the gospels, you hear the songs, the music, the spirituals. They're in the forefront of the civil rights movement. They are training people in their churches. The churches is a place where you learn how to speak. So they're forcing you to speak. We see that in the book, how they made the children orators. They made them do speeches, and a lot of the debates took place in churches, and they're getting in front of churches and debating. That's how I learned how to speak. I tell people, I went to school, of course, but my start in speeches and speaking was church, and we were required to do speeches. We're required to make announcements, required to read, and as a training ground. And it's a safe place. And so we see this in the civil rights movement. They needed someplace. They needed somewhere to be. They needed a place that not only could you be trained for this, but then now you can lay your all on the altar. You can lay your cares on the altar, and they're here to support you in that aspect. And like I said, the Black church it's unmatched. I would say even in some instances, the Black church kind of gets a bad rap when it comes to certain things. And I guess it goes back to intersectionality. If we're talking about homosexuality, and in the Black church, it's somewhat taboo, even though we could always say or joke that a lot of the main supporting members in the church are a part of the homosexual community. And so it's that battle. That's another topic we talk about, intersectionality, being Black and being gay, and that dynamic, and then how you fit that into the church, which is such an integral part to the African American community. It's like how you're battling both, and so that it's such a major thing for people. But it makes you question some things too. But when the church is that forefront, it is that foundation, and it holds an interesting place. Like I said, I grew up in the church, and that is my foundation. So I started speaking, and that's how my kids started speaking, the speaking and the singing. So it's a great resource, and Black people continue to use it. So they continue to use it as a political ground. They continue to use it as a training ground for people as well. But I think sometimes lately it might be shying away from politics a bit, but I see a little politics, but not what we saw during like the civil rights movement, not what we saw before the Emancipation Proclamation. I don't quite think it's the same that it was then.
Well, there are a lot more leadership opportunities for both men and women in other institutions nowadays.
Right.
So exactly. I'm sure there's competition, for which way you're going to go.
Right. So I'm thinking like the political fight, it's gone. It's not in the church. It's outside the church. So I feel like if people say the church isn't doing enough right now, I mean, we don't see that. Like you said, the leaders are elsewhere. They might be members of the church, but they're not bringing that to the church like they were before. They're bringing it.
Do you think it's because during the 50s and 60s, the church has always held that safe place, right? It's like a safe haven, but it truly had to be a safe haven during the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s, because they truly needed a place to be. And now, African Americans can gather in other places.
Yes.
There aren't some of the restrictions that were there then. And so it's come out of the church and gone to other organizations instead.
Yes, that's a really great point. You're right, because they don't have to hide. They had to hide. And yes. No one would question them too much if they were in church. Right. Like you said, oh, they're in church. They in church all night.
Yeah.
Some denominations do go all night. So you're right. You're right. And it's not, you're absolutely right. And they didn't have to hide. Because sometimes there'll be other establishments like barbershops and things, but then you have to be really inconspicuous about how you're doing those things. So now it's not as taboo. But I would say that in the African American, I think I can say this, I'm not gonna get in trouble. It still happens. We still feel like we have to find inconspicuous places to meet. Yes. In order to do certain things. So we still meet in secrecy if it's a plan to do anything. So it might not be in the church, but it's still, yeah.
Yes, it's still, yeah. Unfortunately, it is still.
Mm-hmm. You still have to keep it to the ground. You can't tell it too much. Like, we might be here. Yeah. So it's still that way. It's kind of weird, but it's still that way.
And I think that there's a lot of white folks that just don't get that. They don't understand that. They don't understand that you live and you walk in a certain amount of fear or concern. I don't think that I fully understood that until a couple of years ago, right. And I still don't obviously fully understand. I will never fully understand it. Mm-hmm. But I think that there is there's just some things that I'll never understand, but I'll try to at least be aware.
Right, exactly. And I think even like I said, being an African American woman, I mean, you were, I don't say warned of things, but I didn't understand the brevity either until a few years ago, until I'll say Trayvon Martin. Yeah. And I was in college, I was an undergrad. And I was like, what? Like, I didn't, that happened. And then Michael Brown. Mm-hmm. And so when that happened for me, it took me aback, because that's also around that time that he passed away. I found out I was pregnant with my son. And I was like, Like, that shook me. Trayvon Martin made me angry, but now that I'm carrying a child, I remember, and I tell people this, I remember asking, oh, please, I hope he's not a boy. Like, I hope he's not a boy. Like, I don't want, to bring my son into this, because I don't even understand what's going on. Like, I don't get it. But he's a boy. I got my boy. Love my baby. But it's wondering when he's gonna stop being cute. He's cute. Everyone talks my baby is cute. He's so handsome. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I'm a Black mother. I wonder when does he stop being cute, and when does he start being dangerous? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's trying to figure. It's having to keep that in the back of your mind, and that's that post-traumatic slave syndrome. It's me always wondering, okay, I know my child, I know he's lovely and people love him. I said, but I have to realize that some things my son can't do that other children are able to do freely. But then I have to tell them, hey, no, you can't. And so then that's the talk. That's the talk that we have in our community, that, there's some things you can't do that the kids can do. When police stop, it's these things that you think that you would never have to tell your children, but within our community, we have to. And I never thought about that. Even growing up, I never thought about that. But when I had my own child, it's like everything changed. And now it's, okay, now I have to protect my child. And then I have to teach him how to self-preservation, make it home.
And I think that, there are so many things that as parents, just like the statement you made that until you become a mother, you don't know.
Yeah, I was like,
you don't know fear and you don't know true love until you become a mother. But then to have that additional layer of, it can be dangerous to be out after a certain time. I mean, there's another
layer. Of course, it's always dangerous outside, right? Because our parents tell us it's dangerous. Now I have to tell my baby, you make sure you don't walk in the street with a hood on your head, no matter how cold it is outside.
Yes,
you can't walk in the street with a hood on your head, because they're gonna think you're doing. It's like,
right,
that you're doing something, even though you're just minding your business.
Yes.
Or if you're just running down the street, exercising like Ahmaud Arbery, you're minding your business. And so it goes back to the layers, and like, can Black people, can we just be? Can we live? Can we run? Can we exercise? Can we walk down the street and go to the store?
Can you exhale?
Yeah, can I breathe?
Yeah.
Right. Can we do any of this? And so it's almost like it's like another form. Like, yes, slavery is abolished in America. Yes, there are certain civil rights for so many groups, but we have to look and see, are we really truly free? Not even just within the African American community, but even with people are intersexuality, like the homosexual, the LGBTQ community. Are they actually really free? Do they have all the rights that for real we all have the same rights? We really don't. And we keep, passing legislation, but legislation doesn't it doesn't ease the mind, or doesn't ease my spirit. Like, I know it's illegal for somebody to run up on my child, but it doesn't right. Ease my spirit. It doesn't ease it at all. And it goes back to having those conversations, being honest about things that we don't want to talk about, which, it's the difficult history of our country. And it's fine. It's fine. I mean, I'm a historian, so that's what I said. It's fine. It's okay. I'm a historian and anthropologist, but I'm like, it's okay. It's okay to talk about these things, because then we get our feelings out. We get our emotions out. My class sometimes can be a very emotional one, because we do talk about race. We do talk about how things make us feel. And even on both sides, like I have students who are white, I have students that are Black. I was going
to ask you, what's the makeup of your class a lot of times?
I would say when I first started teaching, I mean, of course, it's always majority Black, but this past semester, I had more white students than I ever had. And I was so happy. I was so happy because my class is not just for African Americans. Yeah, I know it says African American studies, but I want other people to come in and, learn African Americans' perspective of politics. of race, of music, of dance. And so I cover all those things in my class because I want people to have a little sample. Like, it's not just the oppression. It's not just, the downtroddenness of history. I want people to celebrate our culture and to, learn more, be respectful. And I love it. It's for everyone. I'll say it's for everyone. It's not just a class for Black people to take. Even though I'm Black, I had a student who told me that she had to look me up on Facebook because if I wasn't Black, she was going to drop the class. Yep. So I was like, well, I'm glad I could make you happy. but it's those conversations I want to just, even if it's just a plant a little seed. I don't expect for people to come out being completely different people, but at least try to go forward with whatever I've taught you. Look further into the subject matter. Ask those questions. Ask yourself those questions. Ask your family members and friends the questions that we have in our class, and kind of get those wheels to turning, and hopefully I'll plant enough seeds, and maybe someone will make a little change out here. That's really what my goal is. I'm keep planting these seeds, and somebody's gonna do something. I keep saying the civil rights movement is our students. Those are young people. Those weren't old people making, movements. I mean, some of them are older, but I'm saying they're younger, and they're making this movement. They're fighting. So you see organizations like SNCC, you see the Black Panthers, you see CORE. These are young people, and they experience things, and they wanted something different. And so I think that's, even you see that in Vanguard with women. You see that throughout history. ACP, the Council of Negro Women, my grandmother was a part of that, and other unions and other grassroots organizations are just able to make an amazing impact because they had to push the drive, and they experienced a few things and decide they're gonna make change. So right now, I'm experiencing Roe v. Wade being dropped. I don't like it. So I don't like it. And so maybe, I don't know, you might see me go be an activist somewhere. I don't know. So it's pushing me to want to do something.
Well, thank you, Courtney, for being here tonight. Thank you, everybody, for being here. This was great. This was a great conversation. And I hope that we continue to have these conversations because I think they're important. I think we all need to hear them. So I do have a couple of closing remarks. I have to thank the American Library Association and the National Endowment for the Humanities. They're the ones that gave us the grant. And please fill out the survey when you leave the meeting tonight. So the next program is going to be on July 26th at 6:30 here on Zoom. And we will have Sharice Jones Branch of Arkansas State University to discuss Ida B. the Queen, which is a children's book. And it is written by Ida B. Wells's granddaughter. I don't know how many greats are in there. I think maybe it's a great-great-granddaughter. So I think that's really cool. So the program will be hosted by the Williams Branch Library, and you can get copies just the way you got copies for tonight's program. So thanks everybody for being here. This was really great. This was the one I was probably the most looking forward to because I thought this was the most important discussion to have. So thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Good night. Be well.